Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of congregational humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis and our online Sunday Assembly for September 6th, 2020. I'm the Reverend Kelly Clement, one of the assistant ministers here at FUS. I'm joined online today by the Reverend Dr. David Breeden, Senior Minister, the Reverend Jim Fody, Assistant Minister, Barb Brooks, Music Director, FUS member Bob Aderhold, and other musicians, and an amazing tech team who is making today possible for all of us and all of you. We say a special welcome to guests and newcomers here, and especially to members and friends of First Universalist Church. We're so glad you've joined us today. First Unitarian Society is a member of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. We are an intentionally and radically inclusive congregational humanist community dedicated to promoting a brave, free, and responsible search for purpose, meaning, and justice. Our theme for the month of September is renewal. Here are a few important announcements to share. Our Active Voices team is back at work with an urgent message. This week, we need to push the U.S. Senate to pass the Delivering for America Act to restore operational standards to the U.S. Postal Service. And this Tuesday marks the return of Write About It, a writing workshop for our times, from 7 to 8:30 p.m. with Rev. Jim. Check the chat box right now to find more information on both of these items. We are now 6 months into online meetings for Sunday assemblies and other society gatherings. Let's each of us give ourselves a pat on the back for making it here today, whether today is your first time or the 26th Sunday you have joined for an online assembly. The way to learn about all the things that are happening in this active congregation is to carefully read our primary communication vehicles, the Friday email and the monthly newsletter. If you're not already on the email list, you can sign up for it on our website, firstunitarian.org. The sign up link is down at the bottom of the homepage. Another way to connect online is via our Facebook group, Members and Friends of First Unitarian Society. We'd love to have you join the conversation there. If you enjoyed today's assembly, please like and subscribe online. In the description at the bottom of your screen, you will find how you can support our mission of congregational humanism at FUS. After assembly today, please stick around for our popular coffee hour via Zoom. The link will be posted in the chat, and we'll do our usual breakout rooms, and of course you can come and go as you wish. Even as some parts of the larger community are opening up, First Unitarian Society plans to have online-only Sunday services for many months to come. Thank you so much again for joining us today.
Each week when we gather, we light our chalice and share one of the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, or one of the aspirations of our congregation. This week we light the chalice remembering our aspiration to support one another's journey toward meaning and connection in the here and now.
Now for our congregational covenant. Love is the spirit of this place, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Which side are you on? 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 This in Harlan County, there are no neutrals there. You'll either be a Union man or a thug for J.H. Clay. Which side are you on? 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 My daddy was a miner, and I'm a miner's son, and I'll stick to the Union till every battle's won. Which side are you on? 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 Don't step for the bosses, don't listen to their lies. Us poor folks haven't got a chance unless we organize. Which side are you on? 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 Oh, workers, can you stand it? Oh, tell me how you can. Will you be a lousy scab or will you be a man? Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
On Sundays, when we gather, whether we're in person or online, we take a few minutes to reflect on the joys, sorrows, and milestones of the human experience. We do this so that we stay in touch with our own humanity. We do this to remind ourselves of the value of a moment of stillness. And we do this so that no one among us is alone, either in celebrating joy or in facing the burdens of life. This weekend marks the traditional time for the return to school in Minnesota. And this morning we pause to acknowledge the immense challenges of this anything but traditional year. Our students, parents, and teachers are facing an array of fears, hopes, and risks not seen in generations. Many families are caught in impossible decisions about what's best for everyone's physical, mental, and social well-being. And these decisions come amid significant emotional and economic pressures. The dangers of this virus and its mismanagement in our country are causing tremendous strain, anxiety, and heartache, and are at odds with human longing. Human beings were meant to be together. We yearn to gather, and children are born to hug. This morning, we honor all those educators who are mustering tremendous energy and creativity to face the profound challenges and grave risks. And we hold in our hearts all the kids, parents, grandparents, teens, college students, and others who are doing their best with the difficult choices of these difficult times. As we strive together to get through the long night of this pandemic, may we continue to offer each other abundant grace, support, and love. We now take a moment of silence. As we come out of the silence, we'll hear our traditional musical response. You're invited to sing along at home if you wish.
And we believe in life and in the strength of love, and we have found our need to be together.
Well, yeah, I like questions. So here's one. What's the difference between Renaissance humanism, Erasmus, Montaigne, and modern humanism? Well, that's a good question because they're different and they're not. Just to set up the oddity of all this question, The World of Persian Literary Humanism. It's a book, and it's talking about the Common Era from around 900 to around 1100 in the Persian area. And what were those Islamic scholars doing that was humanist? Well, let's look at a Wikipedia very Christianocentric definition. It says, humanism regards humanist principles like universal human dignity, individual freedom, and the importance of happiness as essential and principal components of the teachings of Jesus. Probably Allah or God, or it emerged during the Renaissance with strong roots in the patristic period. Well, no, actually, it actually appears much, much earlier than that. And as a matter of fact, the ideas of humanism don't come into the Western world until there are translations out of these works of people like Rumi in the Persian literary tradition. So it's a difficult matter because we are so Western focused that we miss the fact. But it is true that the humanist values that we still very much value, human principles like universal human dignity, individual freedom, and the importance of happiness as essential elements and components of life. Human flourishing, as we put it nowadays, is very important. And yes, the older form of Christianity that had been around for a while, the flesh was to be hated and to be discarded as quickly as one could become a spiritual being and go on to heaven. Individuals didn't matter because God and the King were connected and everything was in its chain of being. The little people, hang them if you really feel like it, they're disposable. So that kind of Christianity is supplanted by a growing idea of humanism. In the Western world, probably in the Renaissance period. Certainly Erasmus, who was, of course, Roman Catholic, was one of the drivers of that, but he was very careful about not stepping over into these Protestant values. Montaigne, the inventor of the essay form, also a humanist, and is watching the religious wars that are going on in France and saying, well, wait a minute, is there any way that we can get beyond these completely deadly but meaningless arguments among Christians to something that might begin to benefit human beings? So yes, The Common Mind, Politics, Society, and Christian Humanism by Thomas More, from Thomas More to Russell Kirk. Who's Russell Kirk? He's very much the proto-conservative in a more educated conservative kind of way, and a Christian humanist. Also, look at this, Reviving Christian Humanism, the new conversation on spirituality, theology, and psychology. And this is a real movement among theologians at the moment. How do we save Christianity? What do we do in order for it to last? And you see here, theology and the sciences. Is science going to wipe out the religious impulse, religious questions? Well, maybe, maybe not. But if we look at it from a humanist Christian viewpoint, or a lot of Europeans anyway, are now calling themselves Christian atheists, can we save this tradition that maybe doesn't anymore have the underpinnings that it once did, miracles and that kind of thing, but it still has a very firm core in democratic principles in the Western world. So Renaissance humanism and previous humanisms that are feeding in. Now, what happened really is that the word humanism, in the context we are using it at First Unitarian Society, didn't exist until John Dietrich was called to First Unitarian Society in 1916. He had been reading British publications and had found this word humanism being used in this context of secularity, focusing on human agency rather than on some kind of relationship with God. And so he took the word and began to spread it. He convinced his friend and fellow Unitarian minister Curtis Reese over in Des Moines, Iowa, to join in the fight. And they used the word long enough for it to begin to spread among Unitarian and then Universalist ministers. And then Curtis Reese didn't really like the life of a parish minister, so he goes to Chicago, starts working through Meadville Theological School, and also the Western Conference of the AUA, the American Unitarian Association. And there he had quite a bit of influence over the Midwest, turning into a humanist enclave. Humanism never really caught on the East Coast. There's lots of speculation about why that happened. One being there's just a lot more investment in the structure of white Anglo-Saxon Protestantism on the East Coast. And so why were they going to begin to undermine their own power by questioning Christianity? Why do that? And that's exactly what the humanists out in the Midwest were doing. The term really caught on when John Dewey, who was already an internationally known philosopher, began to use the term. Of course, he wrote A Common Faith, a great book, very central to Unitarian Universalist thinking, published in 1934. The Humanist Manifesto appeared in 1933. And let's look at the seventh point of the Humanist Manifesto, 1933. It says this: religion consists of those actions, purposes, and experiences which are humanly significant. Nothing human is alien to the religious. It includes labor, art, science, philosophy, love, friendship, recreation, all that is in its degree expressive of intelligently satisfying human living. The distinction between the sacred and the secular can no longer be maintained. And so here we have the Western world had created this thing called religion. People had it or they didn't. You took it and you could commodify it. You could put it into a box. You could live with it or without it. No, say the humanists, we're going to go back to the future and say religion permeates every action of the human. Everything from labor, and they were very much insistent that we live in a shared life in a shared world. We must have labor paid sufficiently so that everybody can have a chance at looking at art, learning science and philosophy, love and experiencing friendship and recreation. Everybody deserves that. It's a human right, said the humanists, and it's also our religion. It all fits together. And so that's very much a part of that idea. Yes, I think in some ways the old Christian humanists back in the Renaissance would have understood what they were talking about. The human is important. But they weren't quite as developed at the time about that. So that's what I really think about that. There is a continuum, and I always say it's kind of unfortunate that Dietrich latched on that word because it has a few too many meanings. It's a little bit too meaning-laden, and I wish there were a simpler term for it, but this one has caught on. It's been around for a century, and so we're kind of stuck with it at the moment.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you or me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe. I didn't die. Says Joe, I didn't die. And standing there, as big as life, and smiling with his eyes, says Joe, what they can never kill went on to organize, went on to organize. From San Diego up to Maine, in every mine and mill, where working folks defend their rights, that's where you'll find Joe Hill. That's where you'll find Joe Hill. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you or me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he.
But yeah, I like questions. I'm going to conflate a couple of them here. One is, yes, I do have a background as a linguist, and I did come from a particular dialectic group. And also, hey, how did you get away from there? Because it's kind of the kind of place that you don't get away from. Most people don't anyway. So yeah, I speak the Mountain Southern dialect, and it is indeed very mocked and looked down on. We're called hillbillies, trash, et cetera, something I grew up with. You notice that there is the upper Midwestern dialect here, what many of you speak. Then we got the Great Lakes, which is a little bit of Wisconsin into Chicago and into northern Indiana, and then on around the lakes. Midland, which is about half of Iowa, most of Illinois, a good deal of Missouri. And then we have this mountain southern thing, and that is my dialect, and it is a much denigrated one. You probably know it best because it becomes the pseudo dialect in Nashville recorded music. Even if people aren't even remotely from that area, they're often expected to sound like they come from Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, like Dolly Parton actually does. But I think one of the reasons I don't like Nashville music is because actually most people don't have the dialect, and it just doesn't sound very good to me. How did we get there? Well, in the 1740s and 50s, the Midlands area in England, a farming area, fairly poor area, cleaned out their poorhouses, gathered up the families of the people in the poorhouses and put them on ships and sent them to the colonies to get rid of them. So yes, that's one of the reasons that we're called trash. We were refuse in England, and we remained so across the way there after we got here. Most of us, the English, came in southern Maryland, and then started off because southern Maryland was a slave state. It was huge plantations. They certainly didn't want any English poor whites around there. So off the people went. They go into Virginia, and some of them go into North Carolina, and some continue across Virginia, what's now West Virginia, on into Kentucky and Tennessee. So there were, of course, two different kinds of people in that area. There were the English, and then there were the Scots-Irish. They didn't really seem to like each other very much, and the Scots-Irish came in mostly in North Carolina, not farther up. And so they really didn't get together too much until more recent times. My family came through and went into North Carolina. That's where the Cherokee were. Then on over into Tennessee, Kentucky. Eventually came up into the Ohio River Valley and moved into the southern part of Illinois. Again, these hillbillies didn't know how to farm the prairie land. That wasn't something that British peasants had learned to do. So they stuck with the hardwood forest and the very marginal land that they understood. So they were very bound in the Appalachian and Ozark mountain areas. They were very isolated. They were very isolating, and didn't really want outsiders. They didn't want to learn new things, and they remained extremely, extremely poor. So that's kind of the way that worked. And yes, in the US, we do have a caste system, I would argue, and that caste system is based on language and dialect. If you sound like you come from the hills, as I did when I was a kid, you don't get a lot of respect. And so I very early figured out that the way people would treat my parents as ignorant hillbillies, that I didn't want to be treated that way. I didn't want that prejudice. And so I listened in school, I learned some English grammar, and I began to not talk in that dialect. A few examples. For example, we have a lot of old English words that have remained. We use wag as a verb. Dogs wag their tails nowadays, but we used it for the term carry. That's where the word wagon comes from. But wag that over here, and we say instead of carry that over here. We use possessives with an N instead of an S. That's an old English thing that still survives to some extent. But again, television, travel, movies, etc., these things are getting lost. So the plurals when I was a kid was his'n, hern, and theirn, and then Tom and Susan and etc. That's how you made the plural. That's dying out pretty quickly at this point because it sounds so different from the way that most Americans speak. And again, that's part of what happens is people say, "Oh, well, I don't want to sound like that. I better conform to this other kind of dialect, and I will move up in the caste system of America." So I lost my dialect for the most part. My parents are dead, so I don't speak it really anymore. I don't hear it because I don't live there. And it's kind of gone away. In some ways, that's sad. In other ways, that's America. We are not, I think, a melting pot in terms of culture, but we are a melting pot in terms of language. The English language, American English, just sucks things in, makes it their own, and all of these dialects begin to disappear. Another question was, how did you get here? Southern Illinois is such a strange place. I do talk about it once in a while. How did you get out of there? Nowadays, the rural America, they're conservative, they're, prejudiced, and how come you are a liberal? Well, that's a good question. For one thing, my parents were part of labor unions. And yay Labor Day, and so they believed in the Democratic Party and in liberalism in general. Those people are mostly dead now, so that aspect of rural life has now disappeared pretty well, and so that's one thing that's happened. This is a road that leads to my farm. If you look closely, you will see that the field is about 5 or 6 feet above the road on both sides. This road is so old that it's just been sinking all these years. It was first a hunting path, then it becomes a Euro settler path, then it becomes a dirt road, and now a gravel road. And that's as far as it's ever going to go, probably because there just aren't enough people out in the hills to afford paving these things over. This road was used as one of the routes for the Trail of Tears when Andrew Jackson ordered the Army to take a good many of the Cherokee over into Oklahoma. There were 2 routes. One was a river route, and the other was a land route through the southern part of Illinois. And this was one of the pathways that they followed. Over here is my family graveyard. There's the good old sandstone grave markers. These are actually fancy. Most of them in the early days were just blocks of sandstone. They painted the person's name on them, and then guess what? This is 1825, and the paint is kind of washed away. People don't know where the bodies are in these old graveyards very often. The headstones have been stolen, broken, etc. So there you go. It's a place full of history, and I really grew up with history. This is a photo of my father right before the Second World War, out farming. This field is not far from the farmhouse. He was a sharecropper's kid. You'll notice that he's got two horses here, and their ribs are showing. I know the picture isn't great, but you can see the ribs showing on the horses. We do forget that when people are starving, probably their farm animals are too. Horse agriculture continued in that area up through, I've worked horses when I was a kid, not plowing the fields as much as gardening and that kind of stuff. I love working with horses and mules. But the fields are very small there because of the mountainous terrain and the poor quality of the land. How did I get out? Well, here's another thing. My dad and mom, farmers, subsistence farmers. After the Second World War, my dad began to get jobs in various factories, dam projects, building ships, and he just traveled around as a construction worker. These are World War II era surplus trailers, we call them nowadays, mobile homes. This is not a family picture. We didn't have a camera, I don't think. In those days, we didn't have a whole lot, believe me. So this is a nice trailer court. And you see this woman walking along there carrying a bucket of water. These surplus trailers, there's a tin roof there, you really can't see, and then the sides are canvas, hardened canvas. They're not insulated. They did have electricity when the trailer park had electricity. We had a television when it would work, but they didn't have other things like plumbing. They were not built for running water, and so if you want running water, you run and get the water, as we used to say, and that's exactly what this woman walking across here has done. She has gone to get some running water. Another thing is there was no refrigerators in the trailers. We put all of our lunch meats and anything on the roof in the cold months. In the warm months, we didn't have anything refrigerated because that's the way it was. They simply weren't built for that kind of convenience. But they were very light because of the canvas. You hooked them on the back of your V8 Chevy and off you could go. And we traveled for years working, my dad working, and making money at union jobs back in the day, which were good paying jobs at the time. And then taking that money back to the farm and so we could live a little bit better. So that's kind of how I grew up. And again, the dialect, I picked up a lot of Southernisms because we did go into the deeper South, especially, again, in the winter, things were still open to be built out there. And so away we went. How did I get out? Another way I got out was by listening to Bob Dylan. We're going to listen to A Hard Rains Are Gonna Fall here in a little bit. Gonna, by the way, that A is called an intensifier. That is a Southern dialect thing coming directly out of Old English. And it's an intensifier for verbs. And Dylan uses that term, gonna, etc. Again, I don't use my dialect anymore, but that is a leftover from Old English many years ago. I was reading the back of a Dylan album there on the farm, and this was a prose poem written by my hero, Allen Ginsberg. And when I got to the end of it, I saw Allen Ginsberg, co-director, Jack Kerouac School and Disembodied Poetics, Naropa Institute, York Harbor, Maine. Well, I knew where my hero was. And not only that, but he was teaching a school. And so I went in search. No internet in those days, of course. There was never, by the way, a Naropa Institute in York Harbor, Maine. That was just in Ginsberg's imagination. Actually, it formed later than this album was published out in Boulder, Colorado. And I was fortunate to study with many of my heroes out there. The Naropa Institute was the first Buddhist institution in the U.S., founded by Trungpa Rinpoche, who was a escaped Tibetan Buddhist. He escaped from the Chinese communist invasion of Tibet, and set up an idea to bring Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, to the Western world called Shambhala Buddhism. The two directors of the writing program were my heroes. That's William Burroughs, wrote Naked Lunch, and there's Allen Ginsberg, the poet. I always considered myself a fledgling poet, but if you say, wait a minute, I don't understand what this guy's writing, what the heck is this Breeden guy saying? Well, it's because my fiction teacher was William Burroughs. If you've ever tried to read Naked Lunch, you know that it's not all that easy, and you may have even hurled it against the wall, thinking he was trying to play tricks on you. But I went off to school, and I began to work with my heroes, and decided that, man, maybe I could make it out in the world as a poet. Actually, I never did, but I kept going to school, and I did become a professor eventually, which was possible in my day. You could leave the farm and go out and do something else. The people who live in the farms where I'm from now do not do that. America has changed. Schools are no longer cheap. You can't go work a full-time base wage job and pay your way out and pay your tuition. So things were actually easier in my day than they are nowadays. And I deeply regret that. And again, it has some to do with fair wages. So yeah, that's the answer.
We are the proud inheritors of a long tradition of free thinking, reason, and love. Please help us keep our voice loud and strong in these troubled times by giving to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. Thank you.
Well, here's a good question. How do different varieties of Unitarian Universalism coexist without becoming incoherent? And how they interrelate across differences? For example, what are some good frames of mind on strategies or practices for Unitarian Universalist humanists to live in right relationship with Unitarian Universalist theists, including UU Christians, UU Buddhists, UU Wiccans, UU Jews, or UU Muslims, or UU mystics, or UU atheists? Good question. And as we know, there's always been a kind of tension. Do we go all Unitarian Universalists with no hyphens, or does everyone actually need a hyphen because Unitarian Universalism in and of itself is not coherent in its theology? So what do we do? Do we come out of different traditions, practice different traditions, just look at all the different traditions, etc.? Well, as a UU humanist, I really think that the best way to do that is for the overarching congregational moment, what we call assembly, is completely religion negative. Too many of our UU congregations say, yeah, we believe in all of it, we respect all of it, but we're going to use Christian terminology. Well, some people can't be in the room when those Christian words are spoken, if they're going to be true to their faith. So what do you do with that? And so as UU humanists, First Unitarian Society, we simply have a completely religion neutral assembly. You can see how we basically go about this. We have these four parts as we see our order of service. That is the ingathering, sharing among ourselves corporately, learning, and then departing, going out into the world to live our values. We have welcome and announcements. We have opening music. We don't talk about hymns. We have a congregational covenant that doesn't use any theistic language. We try to avoid those songs that are filled with all kinds of religious assumptions and ableist language that we would rather not use. We respect the children by having them with us each Sunday for either the whole time or part of the time, and then they have religious education. We have joys and sorrows. We don't talk about prayer.
And we have talks that are about human problems and how do we live through the next week. Those are the things that we need to deal with. How do we make life better for our community, our nation, our world? We can talk about all those things without any specific religious language. So we can have 30 different religious traditions in the room. No one's going to be offended because there simply isn't any discussion or any kind of heightened quality of any of them. They just are not there. That doesn't mean the people in the pews are not practicing them. It just means we're not going to do this corporately. And then we can talk about our Christianity or Buddhism, etc., other places. And of course, one of the things that the transcendentalists taught us all those years ago is that, yes, there is corporate worship, and that's fine. It's Unitarian, it's good. But over here, we're going to have our spirituality, our transcendence, and that's not going to be within the walls of a congregation. So that's kind of the way we see it, is we just remove it. We're completely neutral on any of those terms. Another question kind of, in that frame, what are some future plans for FUS? Well, yeah, we'll do as we always do, Pinky. We'll try to take over the world. But, okay, not seriously, we will keep working, trying to be the bridge, as we say it, between the secular and the religious worlds. I think this book just came out, is perfectly encapsulates that idea, called For Small Creatures Such as We, Finding Wonder and Meaning in Our Unlikely World. And yes, this is Sasha Sagan, the daughter of Carl Sagan and Alice Druyan. And she was raised completely secular, a secular Jewish tradition, who is a non-theist, doesn't really want to bother thinking about that because she wants to find joy and wonder and ritualized living, a heightened living, as that old Humanist Manifesto talked about in 1933. Let's do those things. Let's focus on those things. And I really think that's probably the future. As we know, there are more and more and more and more people saying they're spiritual but not religious, that they're none of the above. The old lines between all of the Presbyterians over here and all the United Methodists over here, I'm not sure that this really makes much difference anymore. Who knows the difference between a Presbyterian and a Methodist? Theology is just not all that important in lived experience for people. It's fun, but it's not part of lived experience for most people. So let's get over those old European battles, and let's start talking with each other. Let's have conversations, and let's discover what really matters, which is human agency. We human beings can fix human problems. If you believe that, you're a little h humanist or a big H humanist, according to your own choice. So basically, I see a very great future for humanism and Unitarian Universalism in general as a more neutral form of post-Christian world, post-denominational, post-religious. Let's get out of those old modes and those old fences that we were building, and let's get together as human beings and let's fix human problems. So I think that's the future.
Join me from home in our Extinguishing the Chalice words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. All of these we carry in our hearts and in our minds until we are together again.
You look better than I do.
Well, send them both.